Hey guys, thanks for coming. I'm just gonna give it a couple more minutes for late people to log on. In the meantime, for those of you that are here for extra credits, I'm gonna drop a form in the chat for like attendance that we can send out to professors. If you guys want to fill it out. Well, guys, thanks for coming to this book club. So the book we're going to talk about is Race After Technology by Ruha Benjamin. So just a quick summary. She talks about how there's racism in technology nowadays, how codes are written to reflect racist thoughts and opinions. She introduces this thing called the New Jim Code, which is based off the new Jim Crow laws, and basically how like the employment of new technologies reflect and reproduce existing inequities, promoted and perceived as more objective and progressive than discriminatory systems of previous era. So with that, for those of you that have read the book, what's something that really surprised you the most about, technology and race? What thoughts did you guys have when you were going through the book? Go ahead. As open discussion.
Just kind of at the beginning, like right off the bat, it opened my eyes a little bit. Like I never thought, if I named like my children a certain name, that they would automatically be set up, for like a different path in life, or just because that their name is a certain name, they're automatically picked out or discriminated against. That had never really occurred to me. Never, I've never had to worry about that, and it really opened my eyes.
How about anyone else? What were you guys' initial thoughts when reading the book?
So it was literally the first page, so same part as Tristan, basically. Now I knew like people would judge people off names and stuff, but I didn't know like say police programs and stuff like that would flag people, and they mentioned that in the book, and I found that interesting, something I didn't know.
Even small children, right, Damien?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I liked about those opening moves in the book, and full disclosure, I did not have a chance to finish the book before this meeting. I was hoping we might have some subsequent conversations about later chapters, maybe, is she's smartly expanding the idea of code to include tech, like computer coding, but also social codes, and the idea of the code as kind of shorthand So it'd be interesting to think about like synonyms for code, right? So a code as like a cipher or a shrouded language, a code as like a pattern that could be used to solve a particular problem, the code that tells the computer how to do certain operations. So I think that like her analysis of naming and like police databases, but also like the way certain like financial like things are used for financial shorthand, right? Like those kinds of things show that we need to think about technology in this more expansive way in which our society is already embedded in and shaped by these other kinds of codes. So that was like, I just picking up on what's already been said, I think that's a really smart approach and was also very eye-opening for me.
For me, Dr. Johnson knows that I'm a technological humanities major, and so my major is basically combining like literature and humanities classes with, for me, comp-sci classes, software engineering. And so things like this is very interesting to me. It's literally what my major is. And I think it's also important to people who aren't necessarily in my major, but who are going into, say, like coding or other just technological programs in general, to be considering the effects overall of what they're creating. And there needs to be more ethics involved in the creating of these algorithms and these programs. Like what is this going to do in the long run? And how is it going to affect minorities?
I really appreciated that she was like, look, coding, like nothing, and especially coding and technology, is unbiased, right? There's the myth of the unbiased, like scientific investigation or unbiased coding or, all of these things. And like right away, she's like, no, like nothing's unbiased. And of course, like, I was like nodding along with this because of my background in women's and gender studies, but that was really key for me. And I also really appreciate how accessible the writing is for an academic book.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty wild that, I've never even thought about it. Again, I've never had to think about it, but that, the example was given, signing up for a flight, right? Going to the airport, that automatically somewhere written in there is a code to decide whether or not your name should be flagged. That's just crazy.
I also read the part, I don't know if you guys read the part where they have zones with the police. So if you're driving in a certain neighborhood, it like flags the police like this is a zone where there's a lot of crime. So automatically they're on alert to look for people.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess my takeaway from chapter 1 was just reinforcing the fact that oftentimes technology hides or speeds up or deepens the existing prejudices and discriminations in our society, while at the same time advocating to be beneficial for everyone. So it's like a double-edged sword there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I was thinking too, and this kind of triangulates something that Ellen was saying with something Dr. Schaefer was saying, that I think what she's setting us up for in this introduction is to pay attention to the link between the apparent invisibility of social codes and the purported objectivity / deliberate shrouding of like new technological codes, right? So like, the apparent invisibility is actually a mechanism of how the code functions when we think about things like names, right? So part of her point is when I say like, my name is Paul, my name doesn't flag anything, is actually a function of the fact that my name falls within a kind of like white
Mhm.
supremacist society in which my name is not supposed to flag anything, right?
Yeah.
So the very fact that I'm not being flagged is a function of the system, not a glitch, right? And I think where historical social inequalities and the social codes that structure our society prepare us then for like maybe not questioning how our tech works, right? Or assuming that it's working the way it's supposed to work in some kind of ways, right? Like, I'm thinking through that, like, kind of like the invisibility for certain users of codes, which of course are hyper visible to other users, and how that correlates to our trust or lack of trust in the purported objectivity of like technological fixes, which because they're math based or algorithmic based or machine based can claim to be objective or transparent or unbiased.
Mhm.
So I think that's an important like move she's making in the text.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that, on the case of like invisibility, right? Like if there was let's say racism in the past without all this technology, let's say 60 years ago, um, it was in your face. You knew about it because it was there. It was visible. You saw it, you heard it every single day. And now what you're saying like is pretty crazy is it's still there. It's just nobody pays attention or nobody sees it. Nobody knows it's there, but it's still very real.
Although it's become much more explicitly present in the last few years, right? But yeah, there's multiple levels now.
No, I think when you say that, I was in the session earlier and I know like they went on the whole name thing. That was a very big, it was a very big trigger for a lot of people, just like the basic thing. But when in talking about the history between the past and now, the difference is, I think, is that media has played a big part in what people see, so, there's like the idea that suburban America is picket fences, there's no issues in the home, everybody's happy, everybody makes a certain money amount of income, where the urban area is like, oh, they don't have any money, they don't have any education, they don't have any access to anything. But now with technology, we can see that, the lines are blurred and we just don't know because, the media hasn't allowed us to be real on what we see every day, what's happening in this area versus in my area, So I think as society gets to see more, it will all be more blended and there will be more checks and balances in those companies and industries to make these changes that we can't see. And then, like for us, I'm going to make assumptions here, but we're all Americans. So, our flags are different from the flags that would be in Russia or in Africa for all of their systems to combine them. So there are biases everywhere.
Eula, if I could jump in on that last point you just made, you said so many interesting things that I would love us to talk about more, but what you just said reminded me, have you all been following the story about Facebook in Australia? Because it's an interesting example of codes and systems that are where the global, or in this case, US based system, right, which is also international because Facebook is an international social media platform, is directly exerting pressure on local systems. So the story, basically what it is that Australia is trying to pass a law that, and I only know the contours of it, but basically makes it illegal that social media companies can't share news without paying for it. So they have to pay royalties to the news company. And so what Facebook did in retaliation or anticipatory retaliation is basically shut down Facebook in Australia. And it was in one sense, it kind of, you can understand it as a not even negotiation, but just as a kind of like, okay, is this really what you're asking for, right? Because we're providing this information, or a fundamental part of your informational ecosystem. I'm not defending Facebook. I'm just saying, like, you can understand why they did what they did, but it's an interesting point of where when you have a US based company that has a global reach that can exert that kind of power over a sovereign nation's, capacity to protect its news sources, then things get super complicated super fast, right? Because basically what codes is Facebook importing into Australia, right? And this story is making it clear that they're doing it, in pretty powerful ways. So yeah, I think that's and then of course the norms and laws in a place like China have shaped the way these companies function there as well, so yeah.
My take from the book was that even though it deals with race and technology, but it seems like the book is a little late in that technology has taken, these algorithms have taken over more and more things. Today I read in the New York Times that the algorithms are booting out medical doctors who are looking for a residency because they went to a medical school in a foreign country. It was just coded in there where the resident, they have a 61% hit of getting a residency. If you don't get a residency, you can't get state licensure in any of the states. So you leave medical school with $250,000 in debt, and then you don't have a way of making a living at what you went to school for. But I mean, that's going on right now. And I guess I think about the fact that it might not be in my face, but I know that these algorithms are just pervasive in all of our lives. They've talked about it in terms of distributing the vaccines, where the vaccines are going to be distributed, how many doses are going to be allocated to a certain state. So I guess my feeling with the book is that, okay, so what do we do now? Because I think the cat is out the bag and just moving around really willy-nilly.
I was almost overwhelmed by the number of examples in the introduction, talking about like all the different types of discrimination and racism. And it wasn't that people were racist. It wasn't like an intent necessarily in all cases, but that the system itself is set up that way, and technology just drives that even more.
And she kept using the term colorblind racism kind of along with that word, like unbiased as.
It's racism without racists.
Exactly. And so you're just perpetuating white privilege when you don't actually address race, right?
And so many examples.
I read an interesting article recently that was talking about basically the premise was that all white people are racist. And it's like, okay, you need to conceptualize that, like, instead of getting upset about someone calling you racist, take into consideration the privileges someone who's white, like myself, has that someone who's non-white doesn't have. And basically the underlying argument was that white people get more upset about being called racist than about racism. And that's not okay. If you're upset about being called racist, then look at the people who actually are racist and the things that are happening to minorities.
Yeah.
Now, to follow off of that, I just recently read a book by Ibrahim X. Kendi. Like, the book is called How to Be an Anti-Racist. I think he did a really good job, like, defining what racist is and what anti-racist is. Like in the first chapter, it says, racist, one who's supporting a racist policy through their actions, inaction, or expressing a racist idea. Then he goes to say an anti-racist, one who's supporting an anti-racist policy through their actions, or expressing an anti-racist idea. So he says like it's more than being like saying, "Oh, I'm not racist." Like that's still like you're supporting a racist idea, just being more open-minded, like and accepting. So it's a lot more work than I think people really understand what it means to be anti-racist.
Mhm.
There's another book by a guy named Bruce Robbins that I've not read, but if you're a literature professor, you know you can talk about books you haven't read. But I know the premise. I've read short versions of it, and he's looking less specifically at racism, say like in the U.S. context, and looking more globally at the global economy. And the book is called The Beneficiaries, and his premise is basically that at least everyone on this call is a beneficiary of unequal economic systems around the world, right? Like we're working on devices that were built by people who were being paid like very, very poor wages, right? That are relying upon rare earth minerals that were mined under pretty horrible circumstances, right? That enable these devices to work. And so part of his argument is to kind of along lines of what Ellen was suggesting, like admitting that we're the beneficiaries of these systems is the first step in trying to dismantle them or trying to like imagine another world. And I think that's a similar idea to if white people get stuck on being called a racist, they're not paying close enough attention to the way they're beneficiaries of these policies and practices and systems that make life easier for them and have benefited them in all these incalculable ways, right? So I think that's why texts like this and Kendi's are so important, because they're helping to change the conversation from the idea of racism as being a property of an individual to racism as being property of a system or a society, right? And that has broader implications that to go back to what Sheila was saying, I do think the cat is out of the bag. I also think though that those cats have long lives or 9 lives, and that like part of the process that we're involved in takes decades, right? Like in the sense that like we have to learn how to cope with and respond to and adapt, not ourselves, but like actually like put systems in place that down the road will make these things function in more livable ways. I think the hard part is they move so quickly that by the time you spend time working on one, right, the technology has moved on to something else. And that's, I think, one of the real challenges that this book is. Maybe that's going back to Eric's point about the proliferation of the examples, right?
Well,
Like
so are those systems political or are they technology? You know, like
Well, and so on
what systems
that,
are we trying to affect?
I think they're so intertwined. I can't remember who said it earlier, that it's not, specific people intending to be racist by writing these codes and inside these technologies, but it's the system as a whole, right? But we've seen that, with big tech, with some social medias, government's kind of involved as well. And so I think it's all intertwined. And so on that topic, it's if the system is already there and it's got those codes in it, and those systems are kind of racially, I'm not going to say biased, but like set up to be a little racist, how then do you take that entire system, whether it's government involved or not, whether it's, some elites involved, if it's already so ingrained into that system, where do you begin to take out the bottom blocks, to try and get all that to topple down, to try and see that change? I think that's the biggest challenge.
and
I
actually,
think that.
oh, go ahead, please.
Go.
No, please.
So I think they would have to realize first, whoever was the problem, I think they'd have to realize themselves and talk just like we are. And I think that's where it start for them, for the government, if it was the government per se.
Right.
It seems to me if like technology is reproducing colorblind racism because it purports to be unbiased, that we would have to like start instilling, and I'm nowhere near knowing anything about technology, but we'd have to start like doing some sort of like technological affirmative action to like to have the technology like recognize race, but in a not racist way, if that makes sense. I don't know what that would look like, but it seems like since it's already racist, we might as well like do something about it and dive in and work with it somehow. I don't know.
I definitely think she gave a bunch of examples in the book where people tried to do that. They tried to make it anti-racist and it didn't work.
Yeah, that's true. It's true.
Because then people think that you're pointing a finger. Then people think that you're the one causing the problems. Right as soon as you're trying to call something out, then all the lights on you, and it's kind of diverted from where the issue really starts.
Right. So where do we go? Where do we go from there?
Oh, we can solve all the problems right now.
Right now.
Well, I certainly think you need to have more diversification in the people in the coding rooms.
Yes.
And people who have the ability to administer these systems. If you don't have anybody, a woman or African American, whatever, if you don't have any diversity in there, things move along just as they've always moved along. And I think the government is certainly implicit in all of this because the government has always been implicit in racism. We've seen the laws that have been created to keep Black people in a certain environment or a certain area. I'm sure that they know that that the government has an eye. That's just my gut feeling. I can't prove that, but because you're living in a capitalist system, and you got to keep it going. And I don't know where I'm going with this thought, but that's just my that's just my feeling about it. That nothing is innocent. I don't think anything is innocent, and especially when the police can just know where you are. You know, they're surveilled. I feel like I'm being surveilled at all times. Mm-hmm. And what are you doing with that data?
I think you're absolutely right, though. I think it does start with having minorities in the conversation when these things are being programmed, when these things are being created, because obviously in the past, we haven't been. And that's caused a lot of the systematic issues we are seeing today. So moving forward, Dr. Schaefer said, where do we go from here? To start out, we need to make sure that there's a diverse group of people when a lot of these things are being created. That's where we have to start. And if that's still not happening, then we need to demand it.
Well, let me back up. I don't need to, I not only need to be in the room, I need to be the decision maker.
Right.
Okay. I need to have some power behind it.
Exactly.
Because if I can't make the final decision, my sitting up there telling you what you should do is going in one ear and out the other because you're in charge. I need to be in charge. Mm-hmm. I'm not qualified, believe me. I'm not qualified to tell to make an algorithm, but right. I think that's the basis of all of it. You're not in charge.
No, she made that point about how they sent a letter to Facebook and say, we gotta have Black researchers in code sciences in Facebook, writing these codes, especially after a whole bunch of scandals. I think it's absolutely right. You gotta have diversity. If you're writing a code that is for a diverse group of people, you gotta have experts from every aspect of what you're trying to reach.
And it even, I think, goes out to people who don't think they're doing harm, but they're doing it the same way. Let's say like a shopping app, for example, right? You make a profile on a shopping app and you're a 50-year-old white male or, a 20-year-old Black female. you're going to get different suggestions. You're going to get different, categories given to you. And I think so. Even then, you think you're helping and you think that you're doing a service, but really you're doing a huge disservice because you're already profiling people, and you just need to have that kind of openness and transparency for everybody.
I think one of the biggest things is that people need to recognize that we all have biases. I mean, how many of us walk into a room and we instantly start thinking things about the people in the room? Whether we act on those thoughts or not is based on, our upbringing and our values and things like that. But I think until people start recognizing that we do have biases, which then means if we are programming, software, if we're programming tracking technology, those biases are going to be in that technology until we recognize that they're there. I mean, look at facial recognition programs. I mean, those have been known, study after study have come out that people of color are more easily mistaken on those programs because based on the inputs that the programmers put in there, and those are based off of statistics that are biased in themselves. So you're putting in biased information to track people, you're going to get biased results. So I think once we start recognizing that more and instead of just like taking offense that, oh, we have biases, that we address those biases, and then that's when things will start, leaning toward the change that we want to see in these kinds of technology.
And if I can, I think that that's a specific insight that needs to be, that the discourses of and implementation of technological systems adds a spin on that that's really important. And the spin is the illusion that the tech is neutral, right? That the tech is neutral, not the application, right? Because it's easy for us to say, oh, you get a bunch of white guys making a social media app, it's going to look like a social media app that white guys want, right? Or like my friend, I have a number of friends in the tech world, and they like to, one of my friends points out to me, and I love repeating the show, because if you think about it, a lot of the tech boom of the last 2 decades has been solving in problems that 20-something college students think are really serious, right? It'd be awesome if I get a burrito delivered to my dorm right now. Holy shit, why hasn't someone thought of that, right? You know what I mean? The algorithm is just an algorithm in one sense, in the fact that it's built, right? But it can be applied in lots of different ways. The thing that we have to attack, and I think she's attacking this here, is to say it's not just that, right? It's not neutral. It's not a neutral solution to a problem. It always has biases that are baked into it because of either social histories or because of who's in the room and who has the power, as Sheila says, to decide the architecture of the thing, or the data sets it's using to create its knowledge, right? So this to be kind of the way I would answer Dr. Meyer's earlier question about is it political or is it technological? I think we have to recognize the intrinsic intersection of those two things, right? And how they're becoming more importantly entwined, right? Because I think for too long, and still, technology has been a black box for a lot of users, not necessarily those who make it, but for those who use it. And so we've kind of treated it almost the way, almost like the stereotype of the high priest who just sort of does their magic and whatever it says is right, right? And I think that books like this are showing us how to see that that's not the case. And that's an important step, right? So yeah, acknowledging that I think that white supremacy has gained a lot of traction and justified itself by acting like it's neutral, right? We're that it's not a position, that it's just sort of the way the world works. And the critique of white supremacy has been able to reveal actually that's an idea that you prop up to keep yourself in that position of power. And I think that technology has a tendency, and I think it's being challenged now, but I think for the last decades, probably since World War II, it's had this sort of aura of objective reality, and now we're starting to recognize that that's not the case. Does that make sense? That's kind of the way I think
Yeah.
that there's the spin of the critique of
Your
the unbiased
one
observer.
problem is like old people don't want burritos delivered to their old folks home.
Well, I mean, I'm not saying that they can't adapt to it, but would a person who
Everybody
I guess
wants
the question,
burritos.
are you going to focus your energy where you focus your energy on? The problems you choose to focus your energy on reflect your values.
I agree with you.
Yeah. No, so I'm still a beneficiary of the fact that some kid wanted to have a burrito delivered to his house, no doubt. Yeah, that's great. But like the fact that that's where the brain power goes, right? That's kind of the interesting question.
Mm.
Kind of on top of that, I guess, like if you are looking at, those who get to decide it, those who code it, decide what goes into it, I guess that kind of is on that same wavelength as government. Those who have been there, those who have that power to decide what to do with it are going to do, for their interest, right? So if it is a system where they are intertwined and they do kind of work together, then you're seeing the problems may not reside in one group or another, but it's kind of clashing all over the place throughout.
Also, I mean, if we're talking about government and the rules they make, I mean, we realize what the problem is. It's because we still have the same politicians in office that have been around since these problems were in our face. I mean, everyone talks about civil rights and things like that, like it's a thing of the past, but there are people that are still alive today that went through the civil rights era, and the politicians that were during the era are still the same politicians that are in office right now. I mean, some of these politicians have been in office for 50, 60 years, and they're still the ones making the decisions that are affecting us today. And a lot of people want to focus on one or two things, but if we keep electing the same people into office, they're going to keep making the same decisions, and nothing's ever going to change, no matter how many good ideas we come up with or how many changes, policy changes we want to make, because if the same people are in office, the same policies are going to come out. And for me, that's why I always talk about fixing education as the biggest thing, because I mean, that's where it all starts. I mean, no one is just born the way they are. They are taught, they are, they learn it from their peers. And if we don't fix the education system, we're going to always have the same people in the same areas all the time. There's never going to be that diversity, that mix of people's values and things like that, because all the systems are set up to keep, funneling people into the same direction always. I mean, we don't have the investment of, STEM fields and things like that in all the schools. They're only specifically targeted towards some schools, which is why we have the same flow of students coming into the same schools and same universities. I mean, you want to diversify a campus, you want to diversify a school system, you got to give everyone the same opportunities, not just keep investing the same, money and things like that. I mean, look at the public school system. I mean, the money goes to schools that do better. Why do they do better? Because they keep getting more money, and that's the same system. Like schools that don't get the money don't perform well, but then they can't perform well because they don't get the money. So that whole system has to flip basically the opposite way. The schools that need the more money, the more resources need to be invested more. The ones that are already doing well don't need the same amount of resources anymore. So I think that's where we start off.
We got to start teaching critical media studies at a very young age, I think. But yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, that was one of the big themes I found. She had a quote from someone else, I guess: on the scale of candy to crack, screen addiction is closer to cocaine.
Yeah.
And this was before COVID. Like my kids are just on Zoom all day and then on YouTube all night. They're literally addicted to screen time. And that's with two parents who are highly educated and, in a great school system. I can't imagine what it's like for other kids in less privileged status. So to me, this like whole COVID quarantine thing has really exacerbated the technology problem,
Yeah.
the inequality problem. It's made it even more present.
Yeah.
So in the chat, I shared an article that Suzanne from the library shared with me earlier after the book talk. And what it talks about is the FAFSA, and then there's I don't know what CSS stands for off the top of my head, but it's like college scholarship something. And I think all students have to fill that, are encouraged to fill it out, right? But what the article talks about is that in most households where it's low income, in which case, parents don't always have the time to handle the stuff for their child. Oftentimes the child steps into the space of having to handle the stuff to prepare themselves for college, as in maybe preparing all the documents to fill out their FAFSA, and in which case filling out this CSS form apparently is so much more grueling than the FAFSA, and you have to do it for every university that you do it for. And some of those universities require different expectations from you. So some is like, okay, we'll upload the documents, these specific documents to the system, but then some are like, oh, we have to upload these additional documents to our specific university system. And the students are like, I don't know anything about these taxes that my parent have to prepare. And some of the questions are in regards to, what are my investments? What investments do you have? And is it this type of investment? And the child is the one responsible for filling this out. And they're saying that oftentimes that the student ends up not applying for those scholarships, not being able to get those scholarships because they just get so confused in the paperwork that they choose not to fill it out at all, in which case they don't have any funding for school and they don't end up going to college because of this. Only because this thing to fill out this scholarship opportunity that's supposed to help
those, because I don't remember that at all. Do you, Paul?
I don't remember filling
I
that
don't
out.
remember, but I just Googled it. It's the scholarship services profile form. So it looks like it has something to do with,
maybe it's a lot of, it mentions
it's like a lot of financial data that sort of is trying to align you up with a particular, like what scholarships are available at your institution. But yeah, I mean, the more onerous those systems are, the almost certainly the more unequal they're going to be, right? Because you either have time or money to fill it, you know what I'm saying? And if you have neither, then you're not likely to
complete it. So there are some people who had really good grades in school and activities involvement and the ability to receive those scholarships, but there was a set of twins that had really good scores, SATs, ACTs, and such, and they weren't able to get the CSS completed because their parents were divorced, and the mother filled it out, but the father chose not to fill it out for whatever reason, and so that just took them out the system.
Wow.
There's only like 400 colleges and universities that use the CSS profile.
Oh, I think that, like I said, I think the article when I read it did mention something about the Ivy League schools. But imagine what that can do for a family if you can have a scholarship to send your child to a school that can give them something that maybe you can only afford a community college to send your child to, right?
And the picture it gives you what's available to you is based on that, right? Like your sense of opportunity is then shaped by what comes available to you. And if there's this like giant wall of form that you have to fill out to get to that other side, then the opportunities might not appear to you or be visible for you to step through. So I mean, I think I'm really glad that Hadi brought up the idea of education too, because if you think about it, like in Michigan, as is the case in Ohio, where I lived before here, and I don't know how many states do this, public school funding is tied to property taxes and property values. And that is a code, right? Like in the sense that she's using it. It's a system that ties two sets of values directly to one another. And then they become mutually reinforcing, right? Because as your property values go up, that creates higher tax assessment for your property, which means you pay more property tax, but then that makes more money for that public school district. That's then, makes the property values go up even further. So you're incentivized as a homeowner within that system to keep the schools selective and the property values high, right? Like you're going against your own self-interests to allow people to come into your school district who aren't living there and paying for those houses and those properties, because if they did, that would drive down your home values, right? So it's, I guess what I'm getting at, and this ties into the form that Eula just shared with us, we have to see how these codes are all interlocking, right, to create these downstream effects of inequality. And I think that the end of the chapter where she sort of challenges techno-determinism, well, I would say those are also, we need to take those into account when we talk about technology, right? Like assessing property values is actually a highly technological process, right? Figuring out how you're going to map out school districts, those all rely on technologies, right? And that they are themselves a technology. So I think that tracing and understanding these systems will give us more power is the right word, but it gives us more tools to then push back against them or to rewrite them or recode them in some kinds of ways. But we have to recognize how intertwined they all are, right? So yeah, I was actually going to share another link on this point. The New York Times. So I apologize if it's if you don't have, through the library, you can get a free New York Times account. I don't pay for mine, but it's through the library. You can get it. So if this is firewalled, let me see if this is it. Actually, I don't even know what I just posted. Yeah, that's it. So it was a story about this new system, new program that a nonprofit is doing where they're connecting students from poorer or disadvantaged school districts to elite college classes. So there's an example of a student taking a Harvard class in poetry, I think like a Tufts class in computer science. And these students are like succeeding at the level, if not higher than the traditional freshmen in these classes. And basically it's giving the lie to the idea that somehow these students are underprepared for these schools, which is why they can't get a more diverse pool of applicants. And they're saying, look, it's the same class, it's the same instructor, they're evaluating it the same way, and their pass rate is as high or higher than the Harvard freshman. And so it's hopefully more experiments like this will force institutions of higher education to recognize that their admission practices are the problem, right? That the problems are not the students, the problems are not K through 12, which doesn't say that there aren't problems there as well, but that if, all other things being equal, what we're really just doing in a lot of these institutions is just admitting the people who either are the children of those who've gone to those schools or who already have the wealth to, place themselves in the paths that are recognized for success. So yeah, I think that I was encouraged by this article to see that like there's actually data. I mean, there's a lot of students who enroll in these programs. So it's not just like Sheila, I think we had an earlier conversation, the W.B. Du Bois mindset, right? The talented 10th. This doesn't seem like these are obviously motivated students, but these are kids from all over the country who are
But
taking.
That was always the case. You've always had minority students who were gifted and not gifted, who were doing well. I think it's a fallacy that everybody has to go to a 4-year college. I think it's a fallacy that urban schools do not teach their kids, because I went to an urban school. I went on to college. No, I didn't go to Harvard because I wasn't working that hard. And but that was a personal thing. But it wasn't that my cohort could not have achieved. And part of it went back to it was a working class community. It was working class environment that I grew up in. But there was always it was always understood that you can do better and you will do better than your parents. And for a majority, well, I won't say a majority because I don't have statistics, but I mean, there was no shortage of lawyers and doctors in my age who became lawyers and doctors or professional people. But going back to, I don't know if it's Dr. Meyer, but I would just say Meyer, when he talked about his kids being on YouTube and
Zoom all day
Zoom
and
all
YouTube
day.
all
See,
night.
that's not happening in a lot of African American homes. That's not happening. Okay. You have to find something else to do with yourself. And it's, and I'm not disparaging your household. That's not my point. But at a certain point, parents have to be involved in their children's education. And no one talks about that. You can't expect for your child to go to school and get all that they need. You have to fill in some blanks. And no one ever speaks about that. Yes, and because we all can't live in Birmingham, we all can't live in Farmington Hills. We all don't need maybe we're all not ready to be in a STEM classroom, but that doesn't mean that we can't learn to read and write and think and do math, so that when you get there, then you can move forward. And I think that we have to get away from thinking that nothing of value goes on at home in an urban area, because I just don't believe that.
I totally agree with you.
Can I throw out a personal experience? Actually, it's not me personally, but the soap dispensers. I guess I never realized that they didn't work for dark skin, but we do. In one of my classes, we make bobbleheads of ourselves. So we do 3D scans of your face, and then we 3D print a bobblehead, and it doesn't work for dark skinned people. And I've tried a bunch of solutions, but like I can't get the lighting right for the 3D scanner. So like that's a legitimate thing. Like the technology just doesn't work for certain types of people. Sorry, I had to throw out that example.
But they talked about that in the book. They talked about the Karen cars for photography that Kodak used to have. And they finally fixed that, though. They finally fixed that technology so that light
the 3D scanners do not pick up nearly the quality in dark skin as my skin.
Well, of course, we probably didn't make it.
I mean, that's one of the reasons why. That's one of the reasons why like facial recognition programs are so flawed because of that. Because the tone of someone's skin, it messes with the algorithm, that it gives a lot of false positives of like, oh, this is the person you're looking for, when it's not that person. And that's why like when it comes to people of color, like those programs just don't work like they're supposed to, like the way they advertise them too. And that's why there's such a high percentage of false positives when it comes to facial recognition programs and other programs similar to that, like you were talking about 3D recognition, the face scanning, things like that. They're just not programmed the way they're supposed to be. And again, because of the biases that are inherently programmed into those codes.
It's like technological racial profiling.
Well, the same thing. That's why, like before technology, I mean, it's the same thing with eyewitness accounts of crimes and things like that. Like you see someone for a quick second and you think you recognize them later on, but there's so many factors that influence your decision of whether you actually saw that person or not. So when they tell you, they give you a lineup of people like, oh, is it one of these people? You're going to start picking up on certain things, and then, oh, you recognize that person when you never even saw that person before. That's why you look at a lot of, cases in the past of eyewitness testimony, and, they were so wrong. Like that person was miles away from where the crime happened, and yet they recognize them as being there. And that's where like profiling in airports and things like that with the way the rules are, people in certain areas get so much more profiled than other areas because of that reason. Or sometimes it's the opposite. Like a few years ago, I was in Kansas City, Missouri. And like I was leaving the air, like I was flying back after my conference ended. And I was the only Middle Eastern person in a line, for security. And they're going around and randomly stopping people with the swab that they do to test for like explosives and other things. And I'm the only person, that looks different in the entire line. And I'm thinking in my head that there's no way I'm not going to be randomly chosen, right? And I saw how they were doing. Like they were like every other person, and then they would skip to, and then every other person. And I'm like, based on how they were doing it, I'm like, I have to be picked no matter how they're doing it. And then they ended up swabbing like the 3 people in front of me, and the 3 people behind me, and they just completely skipped me. And that was because I was the only person that looked different in the airport. So it became the opposite situation of any other time being in the airport anywhere else, like basically reverse profiling of the profiling. And I think most people think that's a solution to the problem, but that's not really the solution to the problem. It's that stop profiling in the first place based on, biased criteria. So that's part of the whole mix of things as well, I think.
With that, it's been an hour. I think this has been a great discussion. I'm sure we can go on all night. That's a good problem to have with these discussions. But, I think this was great. I'm definitely learning a lot, things like I would have never thought of. And then for next month, we plan on doing How Women Rise. I think, Eula, if we should contact you so we can get a demand to get copies of the book so the Office of Diversity can distribute it.
Yes.
You could share a little bit.
Yes, I should have copies in maybe by the end of next week.
Sweet.
Yeah, I think we're gonna do the same structure. Thank you to all the professors who are encouraging students to come. We love the attendance and participation. I think it brings more just more minds to these conversations. I love it. So
Thank you
Thank
for
you, John.
moderating.
Thanks for hosting it.
I think this is what we need. Like students need to come together. We're the future. So.
And don't be surprised if you see this video on YouTube, by the way.
With that, thank you guys. If there's nothing else, have a great night.
Have a good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.